Welcome to Niagara Side 101, where we explore the stories and experiences of people living in the beautiful region of Niagara Falls. I'm your host, Bob. Today, we have a special guest who's been through quite a journey. Anna, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Bob. I'm grateful to be here.
Anna, you've been through a lot recently. Would you mind sharing your story with our listeners?
Of course. It all started about a year ago. I was in a relationship that I thought was everything I ever wanted. We lived together near Niagara Falls, and from the outside, everything seemed perfect. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. My partner, he had a temper. At first, it was just harsh words, but over time, voice trembles, it escalated. The emotional abuse turned physical, and I found myself living in constant fear. Then the pandemic hit, and suddenly, we were in lockdown together. The isolation, it made everything so much worse. I felt trapped, not just by the four walls of our home, but by my own fears and doubts. There were days when I could barely get out of bed. The sound of the falls outside our window, which used to bring me so much joy, now felt like a constant reminder of the life I was missing out on.
The abuse didn't start all at once. It was subtle at first, like a slow-growing shadow. He'd make little comments about my appearance, my friends, and my job. "Oh, you're wearing that? Why do you need to go out with them? Maybe you should focus more on our home." I brushed it off at first. I thought he was just being protective, maybe a little insecure. But then, sigh, it started to escalate. One night, I came home late from work. We had a big project and I'd lost track of time. He was waiting for me, pacing in the living room. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. It was suffocating. "Where were you?" he demanded. His voice was low, dangerous. I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He accused me of cheating, of lying. He grabbed my phone, scrolling through my messages and my emails. When he didn't find anything, he threw the phone against the wall. I remember flinching at the sound of it shattering. That was the first time he raised his hand to me. He didn't hit me, not that night. But the threat was there, hanging in the air between us. After that, it was like a dam had broken. The emotional abuse became constant. He'd call me stupid, worthless. He'd tell me I was lucky to have him, that no one else would want me. And God help me, I started to believe him. He isolated me from my friends and family. It happened so gradually that I barely noticed. First, he'd make excuses for why we couldn't attend gatherings. Then he'd pick fights if I wanted to go out. Eventually, it was just easier to stay home, to avoid the conflict. The physical abuse started small too. A shove here, a grab there. He always apologized afterward and promised it would never happen again. And like a fool, I believed him every time. I remember one particularly bad night. We were at a friend's party and I was talking to a coworker. Just talking, nothing more. But when we got home, he exploded. He accused me of flirting, of embarrassing him. He slapped me so hard I saw stars. I tried to leave that night. I grabbed my keys, but he caught me at the door. He pinned me against the wall, his face inches from mine. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled. "You're mine." The next morning, he was all apologies. He brought me flowers, promised to get help. And I stayed. Because I loved him. Because I thought I could help him change. Because I was afraid of what would happen if I left. The abuse affected every aspect of my life. My work suffered because I was constantly exhausted, constantly on edge. I'd jump at every loud noise, flinch at every sudden movement. My coworkers noticed, but I made excuses. I became an expert at hiding bruises with makeup, at explaining away my constant clumsiness. I lost weight because eating became a chore. Sometimes he'd withhold food as punishment, other times he'd force me to eat when I wasn't hungry. It was just another way to control me. Sleep became a luxury. Most nights, I'd lie awake, listening to his breathing, wondering if tonight would be the night he'd go too far. On the nights when he was angry, he'd keep me awake, forcing me to listen to his rants, his accusations. By morning, I'd be a shell, running on empty. The financial abuse was insidious. He controlled all our money. I had to account for every penny I spent. He'd check the receipts, question every purchase. If I bought something he didn't approve of, he'd punish me. Sometimes by taking the item and destroying it sometimes. Voice breaks. In other ways. I lost myself in that relationship. The woman I used to be, confident, outgoing, full of life, she disappeared. In her place was this shadow, this echo of a person who lived in constant fear, constant pain. I'd dream of leaving, of escaping, but then I'd wake up and the reality of my situation would come crashing down. Where would I go? How would I survive? He'd made sure I had no resources, no support system. There were moments of tenderness, of course. That's what made it so confusing and hard to leave. He could be charming, loving even. He'd hold me gently, whisper apologies, and promise to do better. And in those moments, I'd see glimpses of the man I fell in love with. It gave me hope and made me think maybe things could change. But they never did. The cycle would start again, each time worse than the last.
One night, after a particularly bad fight, I realized I couldn't take it anymore. With shaking hands, I packed a small bag and left while he was sleeping. Voice cracks, I had nowhere to go, but I knew I couldn't stay. For weeks, I stayed with different friends, never in one place for too long. I was terrified he'd find me. The isolation I felt during this time, it was overwhelming. I felt so alone, even when surrounded by people who cared about me. But slowly, day by day, I started to rebuild my life. I found a support group for survivors of domestic violence. Hearing other women's stories, small laugh, it made me realize I wasn't alone. There was hope. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Being around the animals, caring for a long time, I'm excited about the future. I'm rediscovering the beauty of Niagara Falls and of life itself. Thank you for letting me share my story, Bob.
Anna, thank you for your bravery in sharing such a personal and powerful story. Your resilience is truly inspiring. To our listeners, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. There are resources available, and you are not alone.
Just don't give up. No matter how dark things seem, there's always hope. You're stronger than you know.
Thank you again, Anna. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Niagara Side 101. If you found Anna's story inspiring, please share this episode with others who might benefit from hearing it. Remember, your story matters too. Until next time, this is Bob, signing off from the edge of Niagara Falls.